So let's talk about Twinmotion. Well, what is it? It's a very, very high-end visualization tool that helps you to very quickly and easily produce grade A quality images, videos, and so forth. You might be familiar with the engine that it's based off of, that being Unreal Engine, the same engine that powers your children's Fortnite, as well as your spouse's love for all things Marvel and Star Wars. Mandalorian, the latest Marvel movies, Wonder Woman, in fact, they were all done, the CGI was done in Unreal Engine, which is the exact same engine and company that powers Twinmotion. So what are we going to, how do we utilize Twinmotion to help in the terms of our project communication? Well, that's what we're kind of here for today, to talk about some of the tools found in Twinmotion for that effect. So one of the things that we're going to be talking about is the phasing, which got completely revamped in the latest update, being 2020.2, that came out roughly about a month ago or so. We're going to be, again, looking at the scene organizer or the scene graph. We're going to be looking at things like X-ray materials and so forth, as well as being able to actually, put notes and comments and things like that on our scenes. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into a Twinmotion project. In this project, I've got it kind of showing off at the very, very earliest stages. Typically, again, you'd modify this layout to be a bit more construction site oriented, but for demo purposes, I wanted to kind of keep it nice and clean. Over here on your right, you'll find your scene graph. Now, some things such as these contextual buildings and roads and things like that might come in already nice and neatly packed. But oftentimes, as you're building out your scene, you'll start to see new assets, specifically object-based assets, or they could be tool-based assets such as custom paths and so forth, being added to this list. This list is in a hierarchy format, so as you can see, as I scroll through it, if I were to expand, say, context, I'll see my roads and my buildings, and there might be some folks, around this part of the greater Ontario region that might be familiar with maybe this neighborhood. And so some of this stuff is starting to look a little bit familiar to you guys. But as you're going through this scene graph, you might notice some things have a little eyeball here and some things do not. Basically, that's just what's on and off currently. As you can see, not everything is currently showing that's in my scene. For instance, these trees. If I wanted to turn this tree on, I can simply turn that on and off. Some folders, again, such as this context, might have subfolders within it. And so how do we kind of organize this a little bit better? Well, maybe I want to put all of my power poles, group them together, and we can do that in order to be able to manipulate them as a group instead of individual objects. Once again, as you start to populate your scene, if everything is an individual object, it might start to get a little bit overwhelming to navigate around that scene. So how do we do that is we can actually come over here to the right and say, all right, I want to create a new container. All right, we can cut, copy, rename, delete items, and so on and so forth. But for right now, I'll just do a new container, and maybe we call these power poles. Okay. And in that folder, I can simply just drag my power pole, and you'll see that it joins that hierarchy. All right. And I've probably got I've got this power pole that still needs to be put in there. So I'm actually going to move that one up. As you can see, it's very easy to rearrange your hierarchy here. So in the case of this, once again, I can move that down in here. Now all of my power poles can be operated either independently or as a group. All right. So once again, that really helps for organizing your scenes as you need to. And here in a couple of minutes, you'll start to understand why it's super helpful to try and keep your scenes relatively organized. A couple of other things that you'll notice on here with our scene graph is the ability to isolate on and off, and I'll show you guys that here shortly. You can collapse the hierarchy, you can add stuff such as custom assets to your user libraries, replace objects, and so on and so forth. We won't get too much into the custom library stuff in this presentation, but I would strongly urge you guys to go check out a link that I will give you a little bit later on where we talk about all of that stuff. Also on this scene graph, I would be remiss if I did not mention that for out-of-the-box content at least, you actually have filters that you can actually filter this down to, specifically those kinds of objects or those categories of objects. And I say from a default standpoint because not all assets will find their correct category. And so when you're starting to work with custom assets, it may start to be placed in certain places that you wouldn't expect those assets to find themselves in. So far, so good, but probably not always. Or you can do all and it shows you everything once again. You can also do sort of what I like to call a little Google search for specific assets. So if I wanted to find a tree, anything with the word tree in it will now be filtered out, to be shown. So all my streets, my actual trees, and my power poles are now, showing up on this list. So that, again, makes life a whole lot easier when you're trying to manipulate and organize your scenes. Next thing that I wanted to talk about would be some of our constraint tools, specifically things like snapping and copying and stuff. So momentarily, let's take a look at, let's go all, fold up context, and we'll go down to, so this time I'm just going to do that version. Yeah, that'll work for now. So this is the dialog box that I'm trying to get to. And so with an instance, you're basically going to be making, I know the phrasing of this is going to be a little weird, but an instance is actually going to allow whatever gets copied to maintain the same settings. So if you make a bunch of instances and you change the setting to one, it's going to change all of the settings for those assets. If you make a copy, it's actually going to create an independent copy, which means it's going to act on its own. So things like light assets, if you make any adjustments to the lights, it's going to change when you make it as a copy, it's going to make them individual, versus if you were to make another instance of this, it will copy whatever the settings were. And in this case, maybe I want it to be down 40 feet, and let's make 4 of those. And so what will happen is every 40 feet, I've made a copy of these barriers. Now, as you can see, as I created those copies of the assets, it actually added those new assets to my hierarchy over here in the scene graph. And so once again, I can either come in and choose to delete them. I can move them around, as independent objects, so on and so forth. Okay, so I'll just delete that one real quick, make life a little bit easier for me. All right, so that's kind of how the snap tools work. You'll also notice that as I was attempting to do that, at least the first couple of times, it did not stick to plane. And I think part of the reason for that was based on where my cursor was, it might have found one of these other surfaces. And so it tried to get the asset to rotate to line up to that surface, whatever it might be. So you do want to be a little bit careful when you're doing that, because it is going to be looking for surfaces of objects as you're placing new objects. Next up, we're going to be taking a look at phasing. All right, so this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because obviously you might have all kinds of different surfaces, such as underground and so forth. So let's take a look at phasing. Now, phasing used to be handled here in the bottom of your scene graph. You used to have something called scene states, and they've actually changed that in the 2020.2 update. Now we would actually go down to media, and you'll find phasing here in media. And with phasing, I don't know how many of our listeners have taken a look at this yet or not, but you'll notice as we go in here that it starts to look a lot more like your typical project management software in the use of Gantt charts and so forth to kind of map out how your construction is going to occur. So real quickly, let me just go ahead and create a new phasing just to show everyone what that's going to look like. So if I were to create a new phasing, once again, we by default get our dates available to us, and right now it's laid out in months. I can make this, up to 6 years in my timeline, 3 years, and so forth. I can even look at it as a certain number of days if I wanted to. And by default, it's going to be looking at your current date based off of your computer's calendar. If you go over to more, however, you can actually turn those dates off. And this can be useful if you guys are trying to do things like design options, show various design options to customers. You can turn these dates off and basically just scroll through those options. And you can change that start date. Again, that start date typically by default is going to be whatever the current date is when you set this phasing up. But you can make it whatever you want it to be if you don't plan on getting that project for another year or so. So once again, we can go back into phasing, and now we see that that phasing is off. You'll also notice in here that we have tracks, all right? And with our tracks, we can, if we do create phase in here, all that's really going to do is it's going to create, if we have nothing selected, that's going to create a new track. If we do have something selected, like one of these phases, you'll notice it's actually going to create a new phase on that currently selected track. So in our case, if I wanted to create a new phase, I can go to create phase, and it's going to create phase 5 on this track. Well, why do we divide up our tracks? I'll show you guys here in a couple of minutes a more clear idea. But for instance, this might be, I don't know, general construction. This one might be architecture, structural framing, or so forth. And so basically, you could divide up your projects into its kit of parts, and then decide, all right, what needs to be shown within each of these kinds of tracks. And if we are kind of putting everything back together, then it doesn't matter if, say, let's say I put this barrier here on my general track. So let me go back in my phasing. Let's turn that barrier on in the general track, and then we'll turn it off in the phase 2, phase 4. All right. So maybe we don't see it in those, but we see it in general. Well, when we go to run our phase overall, we're going to see it because it shows up in one of these phases that are along our timeline here. All right. So even though it didn't exist in my architectural phase 2 or my framing phase 4, as we move our timeline around, you'll notice that it does show because it still exists in phase 1. If we don't want it to show up at all, then maybe we want to turn it off in both phases. So in this case, you'll notice that as I move it over, it turns it completely off in that phase. So that's kind of a high level view of phasing in that regard. Now let's take a look at one that's a little bit more developed. You'll notice that I do have a few different tracks in here, and I have placed certain things on here at certain times. So, you know, things like underground, I've got some site clearance going on. I might have some heavy equipment on the job site. And then going over, I might go into things like framing and so forth. And so, you know, we turn on and off other items in those phases. Basically, what these phases are doing are taking snapshots at a current point in time to turn certain things on and off. All right. Another way to turn certain things on and off, let's say I do have this underground stuff. And so, you know, I want to actually see my underground items. Typically, we might have some plumbing or something along those lines that would be considered underground. All right. So if I've got, you know, all that organized, maybe I want to put those items in its own folder so I can kind of isolate them out. And so that's kind of what I've done here is put my underground stuff specifically in their own folder. Now, there's a reason why I did that, actually, is so that I can go to my right and actually turn isolate on, and I see my underground fittings here. All right. Now, the reason why I wanted to do that is so that I can show you guys another handy little trick. I'm just going to real quickly use my material picker and take a look at what the material is for my underground pipes. We see that I'm looking at carbon steel, and I've actually created a custom material to call it underground. The reason why I made it a custom material is because I want to actually be able to see that through my scene as a sort of X-ray in the sense that I'm looking through the ground as though it was some sort of LiDAR. And so to be able to turn this specific material into an X-ray material, really all it is one setting to turn it on and off. So turn it off, it's kind of your average everyday material, turn it on, and now it's going to have certain X-ray capabilities. You'll also notice that under the X-ray capability, you have more. With a more, we can actually adjust the opacity, the fall off for it, and even colors. So again, if you want to show different systems, different colors in your underground, you absolutely can. Or again, if you want to show different systems within the vertical portion of your building at different colors, it becomes quick and easy to do so. So real quickly, I'm just going to leave that as is. And then I am going to turn off isolation. And now we see that we can actually see that underground pipe under our file here. Okay. So now that we've got some underground showing, and so maybe we want to go back into our phasing here. Yeah, we've got that showing it's turned on. We see that it is honest God underground. We might, you know, again, carry through our phasing. And we'll notice that because we changed the material on that, even if I turn other things on and off, as long as that underground is still visible, it will still show up within these new phases as well to be underground. And so as I'm going through here, you'll notice again that certain things get turned on and off that have been preloaded into my file. And we'll see a little bit of that, the further I get into my phasing. The next thing that I wanted to show you guys was some of our actual collaboration tools in a sense of actual tools. You'll find them in our library, and that library is going to be on that little triangle that you see here on the left. All right, now by default, typically you'll get this sort of directory, where you find your materials, your vegetation, lights, vehicles, so on and so forth. Your user library is for your custom assets. But what I'm interested in is tools. And in the tools section, I have sections, I have notes, animators, which are brand new as well, but we'll cover that in a different session, measure and so forth. So what I really want to take a look at is my section cube, right? Now, as I place this section cube, it literally is a cube that I can use to cut sections through my building for visibility purposes, okay? And it becomes another object that I can spin around, I can manipulate, I can change the sizing of it and so forth. If I wanted to make this a little bit taller, shoot up more through the building, I can absolutely do that by adjusting the vertical scaling of it. Okay. And so in this way, again, I can kind of create live sections through my building. Those of us that work with Navisworks would be very, very familiar with that concept. I can adjust what my trim around that section looks like to better highlight it. So maybe I want to change the color on here to, something a bit more, kind of what we would use for markups and such. So in that sense, that trim becomes red. I can even adjust the thickness of that trim, to be as thin or as wide as I want to within certain parameters. I can even invert that selection, for those of us that would be very, very interested in making some very quick 3D details, maybe help the guy in the field or something. We can very quickly and easily create those. Now you'll notice that that box went away when I deselected that section cube. If I need to come in and manipulate it again, just find my section cube here in my scene graph in the hierarchy here and just select it and be good to go. If I were to disable it, basically what that's going to do is it's going to turn off that section cube. Okay, so if I turn it on, it's enabled. If it's off, then it's basically turned off. Okay, so once again, I can move that section cube, as I want to throughout my scene. You'll notice sometimes it kind of wants to go at a different angle. Once again, that has to do with the surfaces in relationship to the gizmo. All right, so I'm going to turn that off real quickly, and we'll talk about a couple of the other tools. So as I'm in the framing stage of things, now might be a good time to also take a look at measurements. Yes, we can actually pull dimensions in the field, or at least within Twinmotion, should the architect or engineer forget to put one or two of them. And so what we can do is actually go in and use our measure tool. Once again, that'll be under the tools in our library. So tools, and then we'll go to measure. This is our measure tool. So hit our measure tool, and it's going to be looking for, once again, a surface to attach itself to. And then the other side of that arrow, you'll notice that it's looking for another surface directly across from it. And so it's going to go on the way that the default setting is anyways. So it's going to go on until it finds another surface to make that dimension. So if I wanted to, change that, what I would need to do is turn off that constraint. So now I've actually got the ability to change, what that's going to be looking at. So if I only wanted to see things up to 5 feet, well, that's what 5 feet looks like. If I wanted to, adjust it to 10 feet, then that's what 10 feet looks like. But if I turn off or turn on that constraint, that means that it's basically going to keep on going until it sees another surface. I can actually come in here and put that on a vertical surface, and it will basically shoot in a horizontal direction, as you can see. And it went straight through that column all the way to the surface of the next building because it did not find another surface until just now. So now we see the spacing in between my columns. All right. Sometimes you might need to adjust the actual position of the text along that dimension. You might need to adjust the scale of it, for better legibility. And of course, you can always adjust the color of that dimension. So if we want our classic red dimensions that many people utilize, we can absolutely do that. You'll notice that the text for the measure tool will always be facing the camera. Okay. I say that because of the next tool that we're going to take a look at would be the notes tool. Okay. And so with the notes tool, once again, I can place that anywhere, and it's going to be looking for a surface by default. And when I'm in the note tool, then I can, put in notes here saying this is going to be an RFI, and we'll say adjust column to 14 feet. And I can tweak the way that that text reads on that note. If I so choose, I can adjust the size of that note. Again, for those of us that, might require it to be able to see it a little bit easier. I can also have it face the camera all the time, just like that dimension. So as I move this around, it's always legible. I can also adjust the color on it as well, for the background to help it pop out a little bit better. All right. Now, a thing with these notes, however, is that you'll notice that it's kind of got two parts to it. It's got the note body and kind of the note title itself. If you hit that little hyphen or dash mark there at the bottom, it will actually condense it down into just the title of that comment or note by itself. Again, for legibility purposes, sometimes, we don't want them, we want to see that they're there, but we don't want them to be, kind of overshadowing other things in my scene. If I wanted to blow it back up again, just hit that little plus sign, and there we go, and we see that note once again. Okay. So real quickly, again, we can do multiple notes on here. Maybe do another one. Each note is an independent object. So, again, I can turn them on and off. We'll just leave that as is for now. I can scale this one, be really big, really small, so on and so forth. If I don't want to see the other one, but I do want to see this one, I can turn them on and off. So for issues such as revisions and things of that nature, you can actually kind of keep something of a paper trail with these, as you're going through. Okay, so just for posterity's sake, I'm going to real quickly come back over here, and I'm going to zoom out my timeline here to kind of go to the end of things. All right, so as we pull this over, we see that, once again, I'm changing what's currently turned on and off in each phase. So certain things show up at certain times. So now this will be the end of that construction, theoretically. And so, now we see cars, traffic coming down the road, we see trees and so on and so forth, and we might see people. What shows is completely dependent on you guys and what you want to show at those specific phases. So once you've gotten your phases put together, one thing that you might be interested in doing is going in and creating a video. Now, as you create a video, you're going to get the option to include that phasing into that video clip. All right, and so that's where we do that is once you've created that first video. So if I were to create a new video here, now we've got a video too. If I go down to more, I can actually insert phasing, whatever phasings I've created into that clip. And so basically what's going to happen is it's going to blow through, within that clip, it's going to blow through the phasing sequence there. If I were to hit play. Now this one I made about 2 minutes long. I would recommend that if you are utilizing phasing for clips, that you make them a little bit longer so that Twinmotion actually has the ability to figure out, it has time enough, I should say, to figure out what it needs to turn on and off at specific times. If you keep it at the default 10 seconds, then you're going to get a headache, I'm sure, as it kind of tries to blow through everything. But yes, you can absolutely put your phases into a video format. And then once it's in video format, then you can go in and do some post-processing if you choose to, changing the time of day and the seasons and all that good stuff that we talk about in other presentations. So yes, again, you can absolutely create videos with your phases. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to very quickly quit the media mode, and you'll notice that those things that I added that didn't necessarily get turned off in a specific phase or two, they will still remain on until I turn them off. So maybe these tools, if you're going to be making much use of those, maybe that would be a good opportunity for things like if you're doing comments and things like that, to put them all in their same folder to help kind of navigate around all of that. So one last thing, since I do have comments in here, maybe I want to show them in Revit, taking it back to the guys in the office to make some adjustments. And so what I would need to do is within Twinmotion, I have the ability to export what they call BCF files. And BCF files will basically take quote unquote BIM content out of Twinmotion in the form of these comments and pull them back into Revit in a way that Revit can read them. And so what I might do is say export BCF file, and for my purposes, I'm just going to toss it on my desktop, and it's going to export those notes. Now, unfortunately, if you want to read BCF files in Revit, I would recommend to get a extension for Revit that is found in the application store, in the Autodesk application store, called BCF Manager. All right, that BCF Manager will allow you to actually go in and pull those BCF files into Revit. So let's go in and import a BCF file. I'll just do this one real quickly. And we see that, I've got a couple of notes here that I actually did previously, that I can pull into Revit and say, all right, this is where I need to verify, what's going on with my brick here. We see in this particular tool, we see that, again, we can see when it was created, who made it, and kind of a snapshot as to what it is that it's referring to. Okay. So once again, I would recommend utilizing this tool or something like it in conjunction with your Revit file. All right. So that's how we can, again, pull those comments out of Twinmotion and back into Revit and to be utilized directly in there. Okay. So that being said, as we've epically, no pun intended, to Epic Games, but epically noted a couple of times today that Revit or Twinmotion does have some interesting qualities about it in regards to kind of what it needs to run well and not crash. And some of those things might be your system requirements. Couple of big things to take a look at would be your GPUs or your graphics cards and your RAM. This is going to be typical for pretty much any very, very high-end visualization software that you utilize, where RAM and your GPUs are going to be paramount, that you get as much as your budget will allow. The minimum recommended specs are okay, and even to some degree, your recommended specs, again, are what I would actually consider the minimum. All right. So in this case, again, probably want to get at least a 32 gigs of RAM and something like at least a 2070, maybe a higher. You'll notice that these do tend to be gaming cards. And the reason for that is because in visualization software, you typically are going to be moving around a lot, and gaming cards, the architecture in them, even if otherwise, the specifications are the same, in gaming cards, the architecture is written in such a way that they anticipate you to be constantly moving, as we did. And so it's going to be able to calculate the pixels and all that good behind the scenes stuff much easier than something like Revit, where you're in many ways staring at the same screen for 8 hours a day. So I would strongly recommend going with an actual gaming card whenever possible. Again, minimum requirements, we're going to be looking at about 6 gigs on the graphic card. That's actually on the graphics card. That's not including an actual set of RAM. Okay. And for slightly larger projects that are going to be more than a gigabyte, again, the higher the better. Okay. I would also mention that if you want quicker loading times and things of that nature, do look at trying to store your assets on an SSD drive, your assets and files, so that they'll be loading faster. Twinmotion does get a little iffy if you're storing things on something like a Dropbox, and that's just because it's trying to, download and synchronize and all that kind of good stuff. So real quickly, my system specs, again, not exactly the greatest in the world for what it is that we're doing, but I was able to wing it. I got a little bit more RAM than minimum, but my GPU is not as good as it should be probably. And so once again, that might have been part of some of our issues there. Okay. I would also strongly recommend, again, I've been mentioning this a few times in this presentation, that we do have other webinars that cover a host of our other tools within Twinmotion. Absolutely, after this presentation, take a little detour over to resources.imagineit.com/virtual reality to take a look at many of our other presentations and white papers on basically tips and tricks and deep dives and so forth as to what exactly you're getting with Twinmotion and kind of how to do some of these things. Lots and lots of useful content coming your way there. I also want to mention that you will get, if you buy Twinmotion today, you will get free upgrades until 2021. That includes likely Twinmotion 2021 itself, which will obviously be out before December next year. So you'll get, all the updates and so forth up until then. We do have some training options. We can do a one-day fundamentals course, and we can also do, custom training should you require it. Just again, once again, feel free to contact your applications administrator, and they will set you up with the information that you need to be signed up for one of those. I would also argue to keep it up to date with Twinmotion via their roadmap. And so you guys can see kind of some of the things coming down the pipe as far as what you're going to be capable of doing in Twinmotion, as well as some of the new assets that they're going to be building into the system. Okay, particularly things like hospital equipment and so forth. So very, very exciting things coming your way with regard to Twinmotion. Stay tuned.